Necromancy ruined the game V2 because I made a video pretty much with the same title a couple months ago, but it's been a few months since that video and the discussion was recently sparked up again over on Twitter. I actually fired out a tweet myself and I'm still regretting it because my phone is still going off from that tweet, even though it's been like 3 days since I tweeted out. But hey-oh, it is what it is. People are really passionate about it and that's a good thing. So I wanted to talk about it in a video again, but I wanted to do it in a bit of a more structured manner than I did before, and in general that I've seen the discussions around this topic over on social medias. I want to focus on the facts first. Things like Necromancy is the absolute best style at the moment to use, which is a fact, and then go into the opinions, because I feel like if we can detach those from each other, because obviously one is not exclusive to the other because people have opinions about the facts, but just point the things out that are factual and then have a discussion about the actual things that people think and what I personally think and the solution that I have, because my solution might be a bit of a controversial one, but I think it will actually solve a lot of issues, but we'll talk about that later, and it might have to do with specific styles to specific bosses, but we'll talk about that later on the video. I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I have been ill, so I sound a little bit different, and also if you go into have discussion in the comment section, please don't just be toxic. A lot of people are passionate about this subject, and a lot of high-level PVMers are very vocal about it, but in general, they do mean well. They don't say these things to make this game worse, even though some of the things that they're saying would actually make the game worse, if that makes any sense. But in general, a lot of them do mean well. So let's jump into the facts. First of all, Necromancy's design. Necromancy has been designed to be an easy style to learn and for you to be introduced to the Runescape combat system through Necromancy, whether that's from the ability pop-ups, whether that's from the simplicity of the style in general, not needing a lot of switches. That is the fundamental design of Necromancy that they've pitched, and I feel, and I guess it's a bit of an opinion, but then again, you can also see it as a fact, that they succeeded in it. It's by far the easiest style to use and the most accessible style to get both financially, even though everything is crashed, but financially, and also to just understand, because you just play through it whilst you're leveling up, and that way you learn everything. It also takes far less time to get absolute best in slot versus other styles, and there aren't any switches. A part of that obviously is because it's been out for 6 months, and the other combat styles have been out for pretty much 20 years at this point, well 23 years, where there's been so many updates, there's so many switches with specific styles, etc. So that makes sense that a new style doesn't have any switches, and they might be introduced in the future, who knows. I mean, it's confirmed that there will be a two-handed Necromancy weapon at some point, so that will have some sort of use, I guess. I guess the only switch that, no, actually that's not a switch, I was going to say the special attack of the other weapon, but just put that in your EOF. So it's a lot more accessible to get very good gear, even if it's just your tier 90, if it's not even a rational gear, it's still really, really powerful and outclasses the majority of other styles. It also has less abilities because of the exact same reason. It hasn't been out for, well, in the case of the abilities, 12 years now, where it's been having had a lot of updates regarding the abilities, so the rotations are also less complicated because there's just less choice for abilities to be using, so it's a lot easier to use certain abilities because they are the most powerful at the moment. Also, Necromancy, as I said before, is by far the best combat style. We can have an argument about that all day long, but it outclasses everything by a landslide, and that is something that, you know, people have an issue with, and I understand that, but we'll touch on that in just a second. And lastly, the other styles will get a buff, and they will be brought in line with Necromancy, especially when it comes to the hit cap. We'll still have to wait and see on if that actually solves the issue. I personally don't think so, and I'll talk about that later as well. But the most important thing that I want to discuss now when it comes to the opinions of other people's is that it ruined the game. And the main arguments that are being made around that subject is that it is too easy, the rotations are the same, and it devalues a lot of achievements. Those are pretty much the three things that I see the most of when it comes to the discussion around Necromancy. And touching up on the it's too easy because it's obviously so powerful is something that I agree with, and that is a fact, right? Like, it's very easy to learn, especially versus other styles, because, well, it's been designed with that, right? So it's pretty much very well designed because it does exactly what it needs to do. But it's too easy for the amount of damage that it puts out, where that I feel like is the biggest concern of a lot of people, especially if you compare it to other styles where it requires switches and other stuff and, more complicated rotations, which I don't really agree with, because even if you look at something like the Fracture Staff of Harmony, right, which was the previous meta before Necromancy came out, it was very simple. You pretty much used Sunshine, then you did an Adrenaline Potion to build up to Tsunami after you're doing your spec, and then you just crit your way to 100%, and then you just spam your ABS, and obviously after the nerf you would just spam Greater Concentrated Blast. It was the same thing every single time, and the same thing, it's pretty much true for Necromancy. It's just a lot more accessible to a lot more people, which you could argue is a bad thing, right? Because, it doesn't really encourage you to, or it doesn't really make a divide between really skilled players and people that just use something very powerful and will be able to do all the bosses because of that. Like, I can see that part of the argument, but at the same time, you want people to play as much of the content as possible, and you don't want a piece of content locked behind thousands and thousands of hours of gameplay, because I think an argument or an aspect that a lot of people, especially high-level PVMers, tend to forget is that, sure, if you have gear, if that's the tier 90 gear or if that's any other gear, it doesn't necessarily make you good at PVM. When do you need to eat? How do you need to do movement? How do you even do defensives? Even defensives, being easier with Necromancy, it still requires you to understand the fundamentals of engaging into combat. And yes, doing high damage really does help with making it a bit easier, right? But I challenge you to ask someone who you know that plays RuneScape that might not really be into PVM, and challenge him to actually do PVM in RuneScape with just giving him gear and be like, good luck. And you'd be surprised how much they would still struggle. I know many people that struggled with Necromancy to take on Hermod, which, if you know, it's pretty much a DPS dump if you know how to PVM. But they are getting 3-4 minute kills because it's still difficult to them. And the people you see on social medias, the videos you see, the streams you see, these are all people that are usually a bit more hardcore. The average Andy that plays this game will probably struggle with the majority of things. And yes, it is a lot easier to do all these things and learn all these things with Necromancy versus any of the other styles. That is just true. That is something that I have to give them. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, at least in my personal opinion, right? But I can see why they feel like that, because it's also kind of devaluing their achievements. For example, a 4K teleskill is made easier with Necromancy. You still need severe amounts of skill to do it, and like popular belief, like it's not like average Andy can just do it. I mean, average Andy could do it anyway, even with range or whatever, if he puts in enough time. But, I personally can't go into Telos and just do 4K like right now. Will it be easier with Necromancy than another style? Yes. But will it still be an absolute challenge? Yes. So it devalued achievement to a certain point of view if you look at it. But on the other hand, it takes less time. And if time makes the achievement more valuable, then sure. I don't know. Like, it just really depends on how you look at it, right? And there's definitely an argument to be made for it devaluing achievement, but then on the other hand, it's really positive that, everyone can interact with it. It's good that you now not need to grind thousands of hours, or hundreds and hundreds of hours if you really do it efficiently. But for the average Joe, it's like 1,000 hours at least to be able to get into PVM properly with like actual best in slot gear, where beforehand you needed Fracture Staff Armadillo, full Crypt Bloom pretty much. You needed all the perks. Preferably you would also get Tectonic besides your Crypt Bloom. Then you would have to get a tier 90 main hand, an offhand. You need to get all these ability upgrades. You need to, unlock all these other things before you can even use it. And Necromancy is literally, you get the gear and you're good to go. And you could argue that that's a negative thing, right? Because, it takes out a lot of time played. But then again, if you want to get players to actually interact with PVM, and you want to pitch this game to newer players, then having to grind 1,000 hours to get pretty much the best gear in the game is not appealing to the majority of players. And sure, RuneScape is that type of game, and that's what it's fundamentally designed for. And you could argue, well, then this game isn't for you. But that is something MMORPGs struggle with as a genre as a whole, is because it's been designed, usually the most MMOs that are still successful were designed in the early 2000s, right? Or late 90s even, like World of Warcraft. And back then, long grinds were pretty much a part of the game, and that's really it. But nowadays, with games being different, to a 1,000-hour grind is not really appealing to anyone anymore. They will just go play another game that, you know, doesn't have a 1,000-hour grind, and that has to do with endgame syndrome. I made a whole video about it on 2 channels at this point, so if you're interested in that, go into it. But that is generally an aspect of it, and that's something Jagex are probably considering when it comes to Necromancy. And you being able to play with your friends and be like, hey dude, if you spend like maybe 50 hours or something getting all your Necromancy upgrades, at least to tier 90 or whatever, we can actually realistically PvM and you could move on in the game, and that's a good thing. And one thing that I do agree with, and one thing that I think is a glaring issue with Necromancy in general, is that it's literally best in slot for everything. And I think that even when you buff all the other styles, it will still be the preferred style, because it's the best in slot for damage, it has insane healing capabilities, and it's also very tanky, plus you have really good AoE, area of effect, if you don't know what AoE means. So it's a one-stop shop for everything. And beforehand, Melee, for example, was more built around bleeds, and Magic was more tanky and more healy, even though it also did the most damage, and range was more a poison build, which still, in my opinion, is not a good divide, but that's how I feel about it. But pretty much, Necromancy does everything besides obviously the poisoning part, but that's just extra DPS. It used to do that actually at release, by the way, with the zombie. It was ridiculous, and Blood Reaver and whatever, but pretty much it's best in slot for literally everything. And I don't feel like buffing the other styles would really help, because Necromancy, however you put it, fundamentally is designed to be a lot easier to access. And even if you buff the other styles to be more powerful than Necromancy, which from my understanding they aren't at the moment, at least in the current state of the beta, they're pretty much on par with it. But the fact is, it's easier to obtain, however you put it, and you don't need switches, you don't need all these other upgrades to abilities. You just need to get pretty much tier 90, preferably the tier 95 armor from Rashel, and you're good. You do a lot of damage, you do good healing, you're pretty much tanky, and you have good AoE abilities. So I don't even think that it will really solve many issues. I think the gear will go up a little bit in price because a lot of gear has crashed, and I think that is a fundamental flaw with the design of Necromancy, because it was also supposed to lead you into the other styles, which it now doesn't, because, well, they're not powerful, but also them not being powerful enough, the other styles, made all the gear crash, so the money makers through the bosses now also are less good. So it's now less appealing to do PvM that is a Necromancy adjacent, because Rashel is good money, because the Necromancy gear still holds good value, but all the other stuff has gone down tremendously, even though they're still good money, don't get me wrong, but compared to what they were before. Now, there will always be a best in slot, right? Like, however you put it, that goes for every game, and especially with a game like RuneScape, there will be a best in slot. And I think that there are 2 solutions to go about it, right? Like, I think one of the solutions, you can balance all the combat styles, at least in my personal opinion, is how they did it before, where there's a bleed style which focuses on bleeds and mainly fast kills, because that's what Melee was really good for, and have a tank style and a heal one with magic, which does less damage but is very good with tanking and healing and lasting long, and range being just good for longer fights, right? I kind of feel like that was how everything was balanced, even though magic did a buttload of damage beforehand as well, and then give Necromancy plays too. But I personally feel, and I know this is a very controversial opinion, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, is have a style be more powerful to a boss than another one. And I don't mean that if you don't use X style at X boss, so for example Magic at Zamorak, the other styles will be absolutely redundant. No, I think that, for example, if Magic was the preferred style at Zamorak, if he had a weakness to Magic, the other styles would still do 90% of the damage compared to Magic. Because as it sits right now in a vacuum on a boss, if your output is 32k per minute, which I know is low, I know that is, but 320k per minute with Magic and it's 320k a minute with range, that will pretty much translate to a boss if it obviously didn't have defense bonuses, if there was no splashing, if there was no RNG involved, it would still be the exact same thing at every single boss. So at that point, it's just what style does more DPM, that style will be better. Pretty much that's how it used to be, or is at the moment. And I feel like if you have one style just being slightly better than the other style, then it will actually encourage people to get the other styles. Because there are a lot of people in this game, because that's just kind of how RuneScape players work, including myself, that always want the best style or the best gear possible when they go PVMing. And if you make it that Arc Laser is just weaker to range than it is to Magic, then people will get range gear besides their Magic gear, and there will be a reason for it. Because right now, at least for myself, is because sure, range with the poison build might be better at Arc Laser, but overall, Magic will still be really good there, so why would I get it, right? But if another style is just literally better, even if it's only 10%, which is a lot when it comes to PVM, then I feel like there's a reason to get the other gears. But hey-oh, what do I know? I'm just an average PVMer. But to summarize is, did Necromancy ruin the game? No, I don't think so. I think it's really good that a lot of people can now get into PVM. It's not a 1,000-hour grind anymore. But at the same time, it is overtuned, and it really just did destroy all the other styles. Because, let's be honest, if Necromancy released underpowered to all the other styles, no one would have cared. And fun fact, when we first tested it, it was underpowered, besides some infinite damage glitches that Evil Lucario found. But it was underpowered, and if it released like that, people wouldn't really be interested in it, because sure, it's the learner style, but all the other people be like, oh yeah, you just released another combat style, and now us as hardcore players can't interact with it because it's trash. So, however they released it, they would have lost, at least in my opinion, but they did overtune it too much, and it should have been just a better style, just slightly better than all the other ones, but they did it too much, and you know, it is what it is, and everything else is gonna get brought into line. But I don't know if it will solve the issues, because Necromancy will always have it's easy to use, it doesn't require a lot of switches, and it pretty much is the easiest style to obtain as well. So why would you get all the other styles when they are more difficult to get, it's more complicated to use, unless they do a lot more damage, and then all the bosses get easier again, and we'll have these discussions, but about the other styles. So that is just my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Subscribe if you're new, and my name's Chevalric, and I'll see you guys in my next video.